Hollywood's golden age was built on illusions, glamour, romance, and perfectly polished stars. But behind the dazzling lights of the 1930s through the 1960s, there were stories that didn't quite fit the script. Stories of young male actors who broke every unspoken rule by falling in love with women who were not just older, but more powerful, more experienced, and often more dangerous than the studio system could tolerate. Back then, if a man married a younger woman, it was business as usual. But when a younger man fell for an older woman, Hollywood didn't call it love. They called it scandal. These weren't casual flings. Many of these couples married, some quietly, others defiantly. Some relationships were fueled by ambition, others by deep emotional needs. Some burned fast and ended in chaos. Others endured quietly, surviving the judgment, the whispers, and the relentless cameras. So why did these actors do it? Was it for love? Or was there something else? Did these older women offer stability, mentorship, or a way in? As we move through this list of 20 surprising couples, we'll uncover the real reasons behind these marriages. Some tender, some strategic, and some downright tragic. You'll see the media backlash, the career shifts, and the betrayals behind the scenes. Some of these men found true partnerships. Others found themselves trapped in relationships designed to protect secrets. And a few ended up paying the ultimate price for choosing love over image. As one tabloid writer put it in 1951, he didn't marry a woman. He married a headline. By the end of this video, you'll realize that these stories weren't just about love. They were about survival, power, and rebellion in a world that only pretended to be perfect. And trust us, wait until you hear about couple number 16. Their story was hidden for decades, and when it finally came out, it could have ended multiple careers. But before we get into the couples themselves, let's talk about why these relationships were so shocking to begin with. Hollywood's double standard. Why age was a scandal for women. In classic Hollywood, age, of course, wasn't just a number, it was a weapon, especially if you were a woman. Older men dating or marrying much younger starlets. That was practically expected. Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, they were celebrated for it. But flip the roles, and suddenly the story turned sour. When an older woman was seen with a younger man, she wasn't admired. She was mocked, called desperate, meteor, clinging, or trying to stay relevant. Studio heads and gossip columnists framed these women as predatory, like their age was something shameful to hide. It wasn't just the press. These relationships were often career killers. If a young actor married an older woman, especially one more established than him, he risked being seen as weak, whipped, or worse, a gigolo. And for the women, it was even crueler. No matter how successful or respected she was, the moment she dated younger, the press erased her dignity. "She's not aging gracefully," wrote Luella Parsons in one scathing column from 1949. "She's grabbing at youth before it slips away." The studio system also got involved. Agents would warn their clients to keep it quiet or end it. Some couples were pressured to separate or marry others for the cameras. Public image was everything, and these kinds of romances didn't fit the fantasy Hollywood was selling. But the truth was, behind the stage makeup and PR stunts, many of these relationships weren't shameful. They were real, often deeper and more meaningful than the tabloids let on. Still, with so much working against them, it took a rare kind of courage to love out loud. These couples defied the norm at a time when just being seen together could end a career. And one of the most haunting examples of this kind of love? It starts with a boyish star and a scandalous older singer who would change the course of his life forever. Let's talk about Montgomery Clift and Libby Holman. Montgomery Clift and Libby Holman. A love shaped by darkness. Before he was Hollywood's tragic golden boy, Montgomery Clift was a sensitive young actor drawn to intense older women. And no one was more intense or more haunted than Libby Holman. Libby was 16 years his senior, a jazz-age torch singer whose name was wrapped in scandal. She was rich, widowed, and shrouded in whispers. Her husband had died under mysterious circumstances, and some suspected suicide, or worse. By the time she met Clift, her reputation was already inked in gossip and tragedy. Monty, fresh-faced and searching for meaning, was captivated. Libby took him in, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. She encouraged his stage work, gave him space to be vulnerable, and introduced him to high society. But their connection was anything but simple. Some said she wanted to possess him. Others claimed he needed her chaos to feel alive. He didn't need a lover, a friend once said. He needed a mirror, and Libby was cracked glass. Their relationship was never officially labeled, but it consumed them both. She called him her soul twin, and he couldn't seem to let go, even as his fame exploded and his life spiraled. Behind the cameras, Clift wrestled with his identity, substance abuse, and mounting pressure. And while Libby faded into semi-obscurity, her influence never left him. She was the blueprint for the older woman he'd seek out again and again, complicated, intense, and impossible to forget. Montgomery Clift's legacy is filled with pain and brilliance, and in many ways, it all began with Libby Holman, a woman whose love felt more like a storm than a shelter. Coming up next, another relationship that flipped Hollywood expectations. This time, it was a comedy legend and a rising starlet, and their marriage would defy every assumption. Charlie Chaplin and Paulette Goddard, reversing the dynamic. When people talk about Charlie Chaplin, they think of the tramp costume, the silent films, and the global fame. But few remember that at one point in his life, it was his wife, Paulette Goddard, who held the spotlight, and maybe even the power. Paulette was clever, beautiful, and unapologetically modern. She was also younger than Chaplin in years, but in terms of energy and control, the roles seemed reversed. At the time they met, Chaplin was facing backlash from the public and the government. His image was slipping. Paulette, on the other hand, was soaring. She had a fire that Hollywood couldn't ignore. Their marriage was kept secret for years, and when it finally came to light, fans were shocked, not just because of the age gap, but because of who seemed to be leading whom. Chaplin was known for dominating his leading ladies, but Goddard refused to be directed off-screen. She wasn't just his muse, one journalist wrote in '43. She was his equal, and he didn't always like that. Behind the scenes, their marriage was full of tension. Goddard wanted independence. Chaplin wanted control. They clashed, and over time, their bond frayed. Still, she remained one of the few women he ever respected publicly. Their divorce was quiet, but their impact on each other was loud. Paulette went on to make bold choices in her career. Chaplin, despite remarrying, never quite found another woman who challenged him the same way. Their relationship wasn't scandalous because of age. It was scandalous because it disrupted the script. A younger woman taking the lead, while the older man struggled to keep up. Next, we dive into a hidden layer of old Hollywood, a world where older women were sometimes used as cover for a different kind of secret. Ready to meet Tony Perkins and the double life he couldn't escape? Tony Perkins and Tab Hunter's hidden truths and older mentors. In a Hollywood obsessed with appearances, Tony Perkins and Tab Hunter were poster boys for the perfect leading man. Tall, handsome, and clean-cut. They were everything studios wanted to sell. But behind the carefully crafted image, both men were hiding a truth that could have ended their careers overnight. They were gay, and in an era when being out was unthinkable, older women often became their shields. For Perkins, rumors swirled about his connection to older actresses and benefactors. He was linked to more mature women in the press, but insiders whispered that it was all staged. One name that came up often was his deep, almost motherly bond with older women in his inner circle. Mentors, not lovers. He was drawn to their experience, their stability. But the public didn't need to know the truth. They just needed to believe he was straight. Tab Hunter faced the same pressures. His management, desperate to protect his matinee idol image, orchestrated dates with older starlets. The gossip columns lapped it up. Hollywood's newest heartthrob spotted arm in arm with a screen legend, one headline read. But behind closed doors, Hunter was in love with a man and terrified of being found out. "The studio owned our truth," Hunter once admitted in his memoir, "and they sold whatever version worked for them." These older women became tools in a system built on illusion. Were they willing participants or victims of the same lie? It's hard to know. But for Tony and Tab, these relationships were never really about love. They were about survival. Coming up, another young star used as a distraction, except this time, it was the studio that forced the romance, and the real story behind it was far more heartbreaking. Sal Mineo and Jill Hayworth, a studio-staged age gap. Sal Mineo was one of the brightest stars of the 1950s, sensitive, soulful, and just 16 when he starred in Rebel Without a Cause. He quickly became a teen idol. But off-screen, Sal lived a life filled with secrets, and Hollywood wasn't ready to hear any of them. To keep his image intact, the studio paired him with Jill Hayworth, an up-and-coming British actress who was 5 years his senior. They promoted her as his inspiration, even though their relationship was more confusing than romantic. Jill cared for him, no doubt, but there were cracks in the fairy tale from the start. The press played up their romance, calling her his muse. But behind the scenes, they were on and off, more like companions than lovers. Sal was deeply conflicted, hiding his sexuality in a world that punished honesty. And Jill? She seemed caught in a game she never signed up for. As one former publicist put it, the studio turned them into characters, not people. Their relationship never stabilized, and Sal's career suffered for it. He was too emotional, too different, too hard to box in. Jill eventually moved on, but Sal never fully escaped the identity he was forced to perform. He died young, tragically stabbed in an alleyway in 1976. For years, the press reduced him to a fallen teen idol. But those who knew him remembered a man who just wanted to be himself, who used the only tools Hollywood gave him to survive. And in the next story, we meet an actor who entered a relationship not for protection, but for power. A young rogue who married an older starlet and thought he could control her. He was wrong. Let's talk about Errol Flynn and Lily Damita. Errol Flynn and Lily Damita. When a starlet turned the tables. Before he was Hollywood's ultimate swashbuckler, Errol Flynn was just a charming newcomer trying to make his mark. Enter Lily Damita, an elegant French actress, 8 years older, already famous in Europe, and no stranger to men like him. Flynn married her fast, drawn to her sophistication and industry clout. But what he didn't expect was that she wouldn't just be his wife. She'd be the one calling the shots. Lily handled their finances, guided his career moves, and demanded loyalty. For a while, he played along. But Flynn's love of chaos, parties, women, scandals, couldn't be tamed. Their marriage was stormy, full of shouting matches, disappearances, and eventual court battles. After they divorced, she dragged him through a nasty custody fight over their son, and Flynn never quite forgave her. She made him, a biographer once wrote, then made him pay. Flynn's rise was steep, but so was his fall. And Lily? She faded from the spotlight, but never from his shadow. Coming up, another young actor fell for an older woman cloaked in mystery. But unlike Flynn, he wasn't chasing power. He was chasing something he couldn't explain. Marlon Brando and Anna Kashfi. Love, Lies, and Age. Deceit. Marlon Brando was Hollywood's rebel prince, drawn to anything dangerous, strange, or misunderstood. When he married Anna Kashfi in 1957, the tabloids lit up. She was exotic, mysterious, and a few years older. She claimed to be of Indian royalty, but her real name was Joan O'Callaghan, a woman from Wales working as a waitress. Brando fell hard. Maybe it was the allure. Maybe it was her refusal to be ordinary. But the marriage was a disaster almost immediately. There were arguments, custody fights, and endless press scrutiny. Brando later claimed she manipulated him. Kashfi insisted he abandoned her. Their love burned hot and fast and left scars. Their son, Christian, would later be at the center of one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. As Brando's fame grew, so did his pain. And Anna? She became a footnote, yet one he never quite escaped. Next up, a quiet but lasting love between a dance legend and the older woman who helped choreograph his life. Gene Kelly and Jean Coyne, the quiet age gap. Not all age gap relationships in Golden Age Hollywood ended in chaos. Some, like Gene Kelly and Jean Coyne, were quiet, steady, and surprisingly powerful. Jean was 10 years older than Gene and had already made her name behind the curtain. As a choreographer and assistant director, she wasn't chasing fame. She was building it for others. When Kelly rose to fame with Singin' in the Rain, Jean was already in his orbit, helping bring his creative visions to life. They worked together for years before getting married in 1960. Unlike the scandalous tabloid pairings, their love never made headlines. And maybe that's what made it last. Jean didn't need the spotlight. She wanted to help Kelly shine, and in return, he respected her deeply. She understood rhythm better than most dancers, Kelly once said. She was my calm. Their marriage was brief. Jean died of leukemia in 1973, but it was full of collaboration, mutual trust, and loyalty. And in an industry that thrived on chaos, that kind of love was rare. Coming up, we shift from quiet devotion to explosive rumor. What happens when two cultural firebrands from different worlds collide in a story Hollywood tried to bury? James Dean and Eartha Kitt. The alleged fling that shook Hollywood. James Dean and Eartha Kitt were two forces that didn't follow the rules. So when whispers of a romance between them began to surface, the industry didn't know what to do with it. Dean, the brooding rebel of the 1950s, and Kitt, the sensual, outspoken singer-actress known for her fierce independence, would have made headlines even without an age gap. But Eartha was several years older and far more outspoken. Together, they represented everything Hollywood feared: race, rebellion, and raw emotion. The relationship was never confirmed, but Kitt herself hinted that they were close, emotionally, spiritually, maybe even romantically. Jimmy was fragile, she once said. He needed someone who saw the world for what it was. If it happened, it was brief and hidden in plain sight. But the fact that it might have happened at all was enough to send the gossip mills spinning. An interracial couple, an older woman, a younger man on the rise. It was too much for 1950s Hollywood to stomach. Dean died not long after, leaving behind more questions than answers. And Kitt? She kept her secrets close, her power intact. Next, we meet an actor whose entire career was built during his marriage. But his wife, older and wiser, gave up hers so he could shine. The business of marriage. William Holden was one of the most bankable stars of the 1950s, a golden boy with a square jaw, a smooth voice, and a future paved in Oscars. But before the fame, before Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17, there was Brenda Marshall, the woman who helped build his career, then stepped away from her own. Brenda was already an established actress when they married in 1941. A few years older than Holden, she brought poise, experience, and connections. To the outside world, they were a picture-perfect couple. But behind the scenes, things were far more transactional. Brenda gave up acting shortly after their marriage. Whether it was her choice or part of the deal remains unclear. Holden's star rose fast, and she took on the role of supportive wife, while rumors of his affairs and alcoholism began to swirl. Industry insiders said she kept him grounded in the early days, managed his image, and helped him land roles. But the gratitude didn't last. By the time their marriage ended, Brenda had already disappeared from Hollywood's front pages. She was the woman who helped Holden climb. But once he reached the top, he looked down, not back. She knew what she was doing, a studio exec once said, but so did he. Their story wasn't a romance, it was a partnership. And like many Hollywood deals, it ended when the contract expired. Next, we look at another marriage built on image. But this one involved secrets far more dangerous than a wandering eye. A cover story with power imbalance. To the world, Rock Hudson was the ideal man, tall, masculine, and irresistibly charming. But behind the glossy magazine covers and romantic roles, Rock was hiding the most dangerous secret of all in 1950s Hollywood. He was gay. Phyllis Gates was his secretary, older, ambitious, and fiercely protective of him. In 1955, they married in what the press called a whirlwind romance. But insiders weren't so sure. Some claimed it was a cover-up engineered by Hudson's agent. Others believed Phyllis herself pressured the marriage, threatening to expose his truth if he didn't play along. Phyllis always denied it. In later interviews, she said she truly loved him and believed he loved her too. But their marriage didn't last long. Within 3 years, they were divorced, and the rumors only intensified. Hudson remained closeted for the rest of his career, living a carefully guarded life until his tragic death from AIDS in 1985. Phyllis published a memoir afterward, casting herself as a victim of a lie she didn't know she was living. Critics weren't convinced. It wasn't love, one biographer said bluntly. It was survival, for both of them. Their story stands as a painful reminder of how far Hollywood would go to protect its illusions, and how many lives were reshaped to maintain the lie. Next, we'll explore the real reasons why so many young actors fell for older women, and what those relationships gave them that fame never could. Why young actors fell for older women. It's easy to assume these relationships were just about power or publicity, but the truth runs deeper. In an industry built on manipulation and insecurity, many young actors were drawn to older women not because of scandal, but because of safety. Older. Women in Hollywood's golden age weren't just glamorous. They were experienced, emotionally sharp, and often immune to the childish games that defined the studio system. For struggling young men, many of them lost, closeted, or crushed by fame, these women became anchors. They weren't chasing youth. They were offering mentorship. They had money, stability, and influence. Some were former stars who knew exactly how to navigate studio politics. Others were quietly brilliant figures who worked behind the scenes, far from the cameras, but right in the middle of the machine. And for the actors, the attraction wasn't just romantic. It was maternal, spiritual, and sometimes strategic. As one director put it bluntly, a young man with dreams is dangerous. A young man with a woman who knows the game? That's lethal. These relationships gave actors something the studios never could. A place to be real, if only for a moment. But it came at a cost. Because while the young men were seen as bold or rebellious, the women were often the ones who paid the price. And as the media got wind of these unconventional romances, a different kind of drama took center stage. One written by gossip columnists with a poison pen. Gossip columns and moral panic. If love bloomed in secret, Hollywood's gossip machine made sure it died in public. In the Golden Age, columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons didn't just report the news, they controlled it. And nothing sold more papers than a scandal with an older woman at the center. The narrative was predictable and cruel. If a younger actor dated or married an older woman, she was framed as a manipulative cougar, desperate to stay relevant. He was either seen as a pawn, or worse, a boy toy. Headlines labeled them as odd couples and career gambles. Sometimes they didn't even use their names, just titles like Starlet and Her Boy Wonder. Studios often stepped in to manage the damage. Some relationships were covered up entirely. Others were staged or ended under pressure. If the pairing didn't fit the image they were trying to sell, it was scrubbed from the record. Careers were built and broken in the columns of photoplay and modern screen. "Hollywood isn't a town," one columnist famously said. "It's a script." For the couples who survived, it meant living with scrutiny. For those who didn't, it meant disappearing without a trace. Up next, we'll explore what happened after the flashbulbs dimmed, when the cameras stopped rolling and real life took over. Careers made and destroyed. For some of these couples, marrying an older woman was a turning point, for better or worse. A few actors went on to build extraordinary careers, untouched by the whispers. Others, less fortunate, saw everything they'd worked for begin to unravel. Sal Mineo, once a teen icon, struggled to find roles after his studio-engineered relationship with Jill Howarth ended. Hollywood didn't know what to do with a sensitive, complicated man who didn't fit their mold. William Holden, meanwhile, soared to stardom, but left behind the woman who helped launch his rise. Brenda Marshall all but vanished from public life. In many cases, it was the women who suffered most. Cast aside, painted as has-beens, or accused of manipulating young men for attention, their reputations were dragged through headlines and hushed conversations. Even when they'd sacrificed their careers, like Brenda or Jean Coyne, the credit rarely followed them. Yet for all the damage, some actors thrived. Gene Kelly never stopped honoring Gene's contribution to his art. Errol Flynn, despite his decline, always acknowledged Lily Damita's early support. "In Hollywood, you can love someone, but the business has to love you back," one former agent said. And as time passed, people began to see these relationships not as scandals, but as stories of rebellion. Moments when love, or something like it, broke through the rules. But perhaps no story captures that better than our final couple, a pair whose secret was buried for decades, only to resurface long after the cameras had stopped rolling. Rebels. Before their time. What these 20 actors did wasn't just bold. It was revolutionary. In a town obsessed with control, they chose to follow their hearts, even when it meant risking everything. They challenged Hollywood's sacred script, where men are always older, women are always younger, and love is never inconvenient. These actors flipped that narrative, choosing complexity over comfort, truth over image. Many of them paid a price. Careers stalled, reputations shattered, and private pain was played out in public. But in doing so, they exposed the hypocrisy baked into the system. They showed that age didn't define love, and that older women weren't a punchline, but powerful, magnetic, and often the real stars behind the scenes. Today, their stories feel more modern than ever. We recognize their courage, their messiness, their refusal to play by the rules. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, the most shocking relationship of all. One so carefully hidden that even the most seasoned biographers missed it. It wasn't revealed until years after both stars had passed. A clandestine romance between a beloved leading man and an older, Oscar-winning actress, protected by mutual loyalty and ironclad NDAs. A love that survived the studio system by staying in the shadows, because sometimes the greatest love stories in Hollywood never made it to the screen. Thanks for watching 20 Actors Who Married Older Women in Hollywood's Golden Age. These stories were bold, messy, and real, just like love itself. If you enjoyed the journey, give us a like, hit subscribe, and tell us what surprised you most. More untold Hollywood tales coming soon.